We are on agenda item 12, which has too many words for me to summarize. Basically, private landowners' obligations for maintaining waterways. Go for it.
Good afternoon, everybody. This paper came about probably from the recent flooding at Risington. I know one or two councillors visited the site. There were 2 lots of floods there, and like staff, they're put under pressure to do something about the situation that landowners find themselves in. So I've outlined here 4 different cases where they're similar but slightly different problems. The Waterways, some of you would still remember that, and the horrendous amount of debris that came down that stream. And just this year, Gisborne District Council have faced the same problems and the same issues. The locals up there were adamant that it was a regional council problem and the regional council had to fix the problem. And the advice we got was, well, no, we're not liable. That needs to be put back on the forest company, and with a little bit of pressure, which we applied, and various meetings, they actually came to the party, although it still cost the regional council some digger time and staff time. I started with the Risington there at Mangorni, and look, that's a problem there with houses on a floodplain. I'm not aware that we were given or asked for any advice as to the siting of those houses. They are in a floodplain, and every now and then they will get flooded. I'm not convinced in this case that the trees were a main problem there. I think the problem was the water. There's more water there than that low flow stream can accommodate. It might have been made worse perhaps by the trees, but I still think they might have got wet. The other one that comes up regularly is at Wanstead, and what we call the Flaxmill Bridge. That closes the road for a period of time to Purongaho. The issue there has been a farmer upstream who sprayed a big block of willows and just left them, and over the years they've been dying and getting caught up in the waterway. There's also a stop bank there. I've no idea who constructed it. It was probably locally done. It may have been done in the days of the Catchment Board, but currently no one's looking after it. No one maintains it. It's not on our assets, and it overtops fairly frequently. We have assisted the Central Hawke's Bay District Council on a couple of occasions to clear that. The other one, and Councillor Dick, you would remember this one fondly at Waikari Beach. This is an interesting one. The debris that came down the river and subsequently ended up on the beach could have occurred whether it was in production forestry or not, was our conclusion. That the land, the big slip that occurred, would have occurred under natural forestry conditions. But the disturbing thing was, as Councillor Dick will remember, the landowner was particularly concerned about the mess that it left on his private beach, and was making all sorts of noises to get it cleaned up. The fortunate thing about that, we were dealing with PanPac, and they are an environmentally responsible company, and they more or less didn't hesitate to get in there and do their bit. Well, they had to put a digger in there for several days cleaning things up. But that's a bit of a background, and there are plenty more examples like that we deal with on a regular basis. They all have a common theme, and that is, woe is me, why isn't the regional council doing something? So we've had 2 lots of advice from Sainsbury, Logan and Williams. And I won't go through all of that. It is interesting to note, though, that one of a lot of the stuff that we deal with rivers is really old legislation. So this is the Drainage Act 1908. They refer to in the paper here a decision in 1865. It's not a typo. And the other act that we deal with is the Soil Conservation and Rivers Control Act 1949. So these are either really well written acts, or they're probably all due for an overhaul. Anyway, there was no particular liability attached to the council through the operation of the Waterways scheme. And the result was that, yes, the forest company should have paid for the cleanup, but also that we could assist where we could to help smooth the process, and which is more or less what we did. Now, in terms of the more recent opinion that we've got, which hasn't changed, we asked who was responsible for the maintenance of the vegetation alongside the watercourse. And clearly it is the landowner. They're not required to keep the streams clean, but if they are asked to or ordered to, then they are required to do something about it. And under the Act, there's various ways in which we can force that. To my knowledge, we've never ever used those provisions, although just recently there was a case up at Marae Tautara where there was some legal action sort of possibly heading our way, and we got in and through a letter, I think, instructed the landowner that he had to do something, but we paid 30% of the cost of doing that work. This related to trees that would felled into the river. The other, I guess, although we've got powers under the Act, we're not obliged to do anything. And in areas where we need to get in and do something, it needs to be affordable, so we have to have a funding source. The only, sort of to me, the biggest hiccup was the fact that we've got nearly 1,200 kilometres of Crown River land that we administer, and 90 kilometres of our own land, and I think you can multiply that by 2 if you want to deal with both sides of the river. So there's some potential there that we might have some clean-up operations to do, because we are within 3 metres of the banks of the stream in some cases. However, I don't think it's something we need to rush out and deal with. It's something that would be prompted on a complaint, and then we could look at it then. We have two projects, subsidised investigations and minor projects, and the other one is the northern and southern rivers and schemes. Those slightly different objectives, but basically it helps out in particular cases with some funding. That's about all I wanted to say on it, and happy to take any questions.
Gary, Rex and I followed up a complaint, which I thought was the instigator of this paper in Havelock North, where the issue there was that Hastings Council seemed to be permitting developments to occur, that the result of which was overloading a drain going through the middle of Havelock there. And so property owners affected by that were complaining, why are we allowing that? And Chris sent us an email saying, well, we've signed over responsibility for managing drains in Hastings District, or I'm not sure exactly where, to the Hastings District Council. Can you explain what that situation might be?
Yeah, so this arose several years ago. Hastings District Council at the time wanted to take over management of the Havelock North streams and drains. So we have a protocol which we set out on how that would be managed. We haven't handed over the regulatory responsibility because we can't. So the regulatory responsibility still stays with the regional council. What we have handed over is the maintenance responsibility. So it's over to them to maintain and look after those drains. In terms of the house in question, those ones you're talking about, they were minor what's been proposed is very minor, unlikely to have any effect at all on the flood levels. And I think some of that information was a little bit mixed up as to where catchments were and weren't. So the short answer there is they got a lot of rainfall. The stream did what it's supposed to do. Once again, they're partly in the floodplain and they got some water.
So, but the handing over of that's a sort of a routine thing that we do. Do we do similar things in Napier? Or?
No, it's not. No, it wasn't. It was not very acrimonious for a while, the funny thing about it is Hastings, not at all, they believe they got a hospital pass. there's a lot of issues with the Havelock drains, and quite frankly, it was good to hand them over.
Mr. Bevan.
So I recall 50 years ago reading Rollins and Fletcher,
Yeah.
and it seemed old at the time.
Yeah.
So 50 years later, it's much, much older. Gary, a significant problem we're always going to have here is identifying the source of trees that have blocked a stream or river. And I'm going to guess that in more than 50% of occasions, you won't be able to, because people don't put their initials on trees. So you won't know the source. So did the legal advice cover the situation where there's a blockage, it's caused flooding, caused damage, gone into houses, whatever, but the source of the timber that's blocked the stream can't be identified? Whose responsibility is it then?
It didn't cover it explicitly, but certainly with forestry debris, it's usually always been able to, it's usually got saw cuts on the end of it.
Yeah.
So, and that was the case in Kopawafara.
Well, it certainly wasn't at Mungaone, because it was like stuff that got washed off the edge of the river.
Yes, yes. No, they didn't cover that. My guess would be that it's one of the, I mean, we do have things called acts of God that would come under that category, because it's the native trees that have been washed down. No one's really responsible for them. Where you might be considered responsible is if they'd been left there from a previous event and you did nothing about clearing them up, and then they caused an issue.
All right, so that leads to the obvious question. Since it's our regulatory responsibility, have we done any surveys of streams, rivers, where we know there's a propensity for flooding, to find areas where we might have some concerns, and either remove the trees if it's our responsibility, or get the owners to remove trees where it's on their land? Have we? I mean, would it be sensible for us to do some sort of a survey of some of these streams, just so that we're meeting our obligation?
Look, what's a better word than sensible? I'd say, let's just say it's not sensible. It's not the word I'd want to use, but I can't think of another one. As I said, there's 1,200 kilometres times 2, which is a lot of, and we can't get access to a lot of these places either. And a lot of them aren't going to cause a problem. I suppose we could do work around the likes of small communities, Risington, and Ong is another one. There's issues there with trees on the bridge and those sorts of things. But it is a wee can of worms. We're not obliged to do anything under the Act. We can be ordered to by a landowner if they see that we're at fault. We can be asked to do something. Apart from sort of when our staff notice obvious things, that's sort of where my feeling would be to leave it until a problem arises. I know it's not a good answer, but otherwise I don't know how to handle it.
Councillor Hewitt.
Thanks, Gary. Just with the Flax Mill Bridge, and I mean, you've got sort of opportunities for neighbours to be taking neighbours to court, which is never a good situation to be in as a neighbour. But to keep things simple and do the right thing, if we know where the trees are coming from, the branches, the debris, then why can we not be just having that discussion and telling them to sort it? Because it's every heavy rainfall, and it causes quite significant disruption in terms of that bridge. I mean, the school bus can't get past, the ambulances can't get past.
Yeah, we did have the discussion this time. You're right, we could have probably had it earlier. I'm not too sure that we looked that closely at where the trees were coming from. We normally expect tree debris in every stream when it floods. The issue is blamed on the debris, and it does happen, but if you see in that photograph there, the water was overflowing the stop bank, which is at about the same level to the bridge, so even without the debris, the road was going to be flooded. But you're right, we could be a bit more proactive.
Proactive, I think, there, Chris, that's you taking over, but I mean, that would help community solutions and resilience and all the things that we speak about in terms of council good that we do. There's some obvious spots to touch.
So look, it is very obvious, and it does rely on the community doing the right thing. But the point taken, we can be more proactive. The approach, I think, is quite reactive. We do respond to complaints and when the guys notice stuff, and we could shift into that proactive space. The other area of note here is we've highlighted the types of budgets that are set aside for this type of work. So if we do go to a more proactive approach, it's also very likely we'll find more things to fix, and then understanding the rating base to do that. So there's a bit to work through to understand the potential exposure from changing the strategy from reactive to proactive.
Councillor Bailey and Councillor Bevan.
Thank you, Chair. Gary, one of the things you mentioned was the number of properties that are affected that were built on floodplains. I would assume they have consents to build on a floodplain. That seems a bit perverse to me.
They have building consents, which is not necessarily the same thing as a consent to build on a floodplain. I did have a quick look at a couple of properties to see what their consents were, and there's no mention on the limbs about flooding.
Through you, Chair, is that something that comes under one of the district plans or comes under one of our plans? Or I know we've got HPUDs about where we can do new developments in the Hiratonga Plains.
This issue in many parts of the region, particularly around the Hiratonga Plains area, there's detailed flood mapping, and I know at this table in the last 12 months we've received a complaint from a landowner that was concerned about their inability to develop because of the flood risk designation that we had put on that property that had flowed through into the building consent issue with the Hastings District Council. I think in this case these properties were probably consented possibly prior to that, or it's an area, and this is probably an issue with some of our smaller rural communities where we haven't necessarily identified every bit of flood risk everywhere, and that being then reflected in the district plans.
Okay.
Is that fair?
That's fair, but just to add to that, normally when the Hastings District Council have a concern, they will contact the Regional Council and ask for advice. But you have to have staff that are familiar with an area that have a concern for that to be triggered.
Okay, yep.
Mr. Bevan.
Yeah, so I'm one of the people that prompted Gary to write this paper in consequence of a visit that I was asked to make to constituents up on the edge of the Mangaoni stream. And as you quite rightly point out in this report to us, Gary, we did spend some resource and take a digger and what have you up there and cleared the stream and piled up a whole lot of logs, and there's some very big piles of timber sitting now on the floodplain immediately above the river. Now, if there is another blockage in that river and all of those piles of timber end up back in the river, whose responsibility is that? Because that's a real possibility.
You probably know the answer to that. That's a lawyer's question, isn't it? I think they would try to blame the regional council, but on the other hand, it's not our land, it's sitting on their land. All we did was some work there.
So it's worth adding the purpose of those piles are there is to dry out.
So they'll be
and
burnt.
then they'll be burnt, but we need to let them dry out for
That's
a
a
period
very
of time.
great relief to hear.
And that,
the guys usually use their experience to work out where to put them. Obviously, the further you take them away from the river, the slower the job is, so there's a bit of a balancing act.
Right. So we'll pray for very small amounts of rain for the next few months.
I don't.
You know, within 4 or 5 months or the next burning season,
They'll be disposed of. Okay.
So, you mentioned burning, which reminds me, along the Marae-Totara stream at the moment, which is not a floodplain as far as I'm aware, there are now a whole series of giant wood piles. I mean,
yes.
Are those legitimately burned at some point, or what is the fate of those?
So, yeah, they will be burnt. We're just waiting for things to dry out.
That's legal and appropriate under our ground rules.
I hope we can do it legally, yes.
You're
Talk about uncivilised. I think I'm going to go and live in Bavaria.
Councillor Wilson.
This is a guy that's leaving shortly saying, I hope it's legal.
Near the beach.
How extensive is the conversation with the TAs on this stuff? Just an example, Taylor's Bay Beach got smashed with logs at one stage. The district council came in and the mayor forced an action, basically, which QRS did under emergency measures would be my take on it, and charged them $41,000, which made everyone start weeping uncontrollably, and then all of a sudden it was our problem, which is the usual course of action. But obviously it wasn't our problem, and it wasn't really his problem. But how clear are we with our cousins who's sort of responsible for stuff? I mean, as soon as it comes near a waterway, everyone says it's your problem. And my immediate answer is, well, I don't come and dig the drain out on your farm or in front of your batch or whatever it might be, your lifestyle hill country block or whatever it is. Just because it's a creek doesn't automatically mean it's us. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. The only time when it's automatically us is if it was a regulatory thing. For instance, they might want to put a bridge over a waterway. That's a regulatory thing. But in terms of cleaning it up, no, it's not automatically us. Directing your question, like Central Hawke's Bay District Council, we've had quite a lot of pressure over the years from them to protect our rivers from their roads. But we've got a good understanding with them now that we work with them. We actually provide a lot of assistance in terms of advice and those sorts of things, and they've accepted that that's the way it is. We've had a lot of pressure recently from Hastings District Council to protect the Mohaka River from attacking the road up there. Once again, not our issue. The river does what it does. We have no scheme up there. We have no means of funding that sort of work, and it's not our asset at risk. Wairoa, I think we were under a bit of pressure from Wairoa District Council when the Kopuafa event was on to do something because they suffered damage as well. But it's probably not well understood by the territorials where the responsibilities lie.
Well, the classic is the Mahanga creek mouth, which is just always our problem. We don't own any land there. There's no scheme there. All we do is our responsibilities around water quality around the settlement. And the District Council for 20 years has maintained the outlet and maintained the drain behind the batches, and all of a sudden it got too hard, so it's always our problem. So I guess some real crystal clear logic in this would be quite helpful.
In Wairoa.
Well, from us.
Would someone like to move we receive the report?
Just
Councillor Bevan?
Sorry, Chair, just before you do.
Crystal clear
I
logic.
just note that it's a sad day for Mr Clode because I suspect this will be his last appearance before a council committee, and I know how much he enjoys engaging on these matters. We do have a formal farewell from him at the end of the month, but I think this is just the last formal council appearance.
We'll miss your cynical approach to things.
Yeah, it's probably worth noting Gary's been here 28 years, so certainly a huge level of service to the community. So thanks, Gary.
Oh, thanks everybody. I really love working for this place. I really enjoyed it. I have not entirely disappearing. There's a couple of loose ends that I need to help finish off. Hawea Park being one of them. There's one or two other little things that I need to do. Thanks anyhow for all the support that I've had over the years. It's been really good.
Take your speech. Save your speech till you had a few beers, mate.
That was it.
Oh no, that's not it.
It'll be longer and more accurate. Yeah.
That's right. Councillor Bevan, I think
we have a seconder?
you moved. Is there a seconder?
We'll see him.
Councillor Wilson. Anything more?
Yeah, yes, in case I don't get there on the day, thanks for your years of service to the council, Gary. You've done sterling work over a long period of time. This is a really interesting paper in my mind because the incidence of heavy rain causing flash flooding is going to grow. We all know that. And even with the legal advice, I'm not certain we understand what our obligations are. And there are certainly some major problems in areas where we don't have flood control schemes. So we've got no source of funding except pulling it from other budgets. So this is going to be a bit of an ongoing problem, and understanding our role versus the TLAs, as in so many areas, there's lots of grey. And I'm sure that this is going to come back, and we're going to have some more discussions about this over time.
Seconder.
Goodbye, Gary.
There are no other speakers. Well done, thank you. All those in favour? Aye. Opposed? Carried.
Thank you.
Hotspots.
Chair, so the team are going to pop up the front and take through the paper. Unfortunately, a bit of a communication breakdown. I suspect that they thought they were not on this afternoon, given the delay in the agenda. So most of the team are not here. But if you can come up to the front of the table and you can step us through the paper.
Or if you wish, we could leave it to just take the questions, but it's...
I'll over to you. Yep.
So there's no planned presentation, in other words?
There's no planned presentation. So just
it's-
whether any of these gentlemen want to make any comments about their projects. If not, we can just take it as read and answer questions.
I can just give a brief update in terms of the Whātuma. So in regards to that, there was a meeting held, I'm not sure exactly on the date, but possibly around a month ago, regarding the options that might be available around Lake Whātuma in terms of a hotspot and in terms of the future management and potentially ownership of that part of the lake. And I think it was a pretty positive meeting, and I think it was a clear direction from that, from the people who were involved, that it was good to proceed and to start making connections with especially one of the major landholders across that lake. And that meeting is scheduled for this Friday morning, so that's a pretty positive move, and I think it's good to have some movement in that and direction around getting something going forward. So yeah, it's a pretty positive outcome, I think.
Just note there's still significant funding to be spending there as ongoing. It'd be a shame to see it slip away under this annual plan. Follow that path, but keep the work going there as well. Yeah,
Absolutely.
would be. Yeah, and if I can add one more thing, it's a shame, Chair, that we've had a couple of these gentlemen sitting around all day when they were here this morning, and they could have been back out, especially Dean, who's very busy down in St Hawke's Bay.
Do you want to make any comments about Tutera or
So, Whakaki Hotspots, things are going reasonably well. The on-ground work is following, the plan we developed a few months ago. The key thing for us is really to get these consents in regards to the Freshwater Improvement Fund over the line. That's really the key thing for us, and it's where we are having some challenges, I would say. We have got 5 weeks now to get the document signed. And I suspect that very soon we will have a team approach to actually nail this important part of the job. So the planting, the fencing, all this on-ground work is following its normal course. But I just raise a little bit of a flag for the consent. It is a difficult step to carry over properly, and we've got 5 weeks to deliver on that. In which case we may not be able to leverage this Freshwater Improvement Fund. That's the reality of it.
So you made this comment, it's on point 15 in the paper, page 55. So you're saying the entire project would basically be off the books if we can't get, so is there any help needed, or what is, are all hands on deck on this? What's going on?
So we are actually going to have a meeting soon, or we have had meetings to develop a strategy to make sure in the next 5 weeks we can deliver on that. There is a lot of hope, but I just wanted to be honest with you guys. It is more difficult than we thought, and we really need this team approach to get the job done.
So Chair, the challenge is that for us to make the project go ahead, we need to get affected party sign off on the weir structure for lake level management. That's, as Nick's pointed out, proving to be challenging. We're meeting this afternoon with some key people to figure out what we can do about that. The reality is that if we can't get over the line, that may be the end of the Freshwater Improvement funded part of the Whakakī project, but it won't be an exit of this council from Whakakī. There will be a plan B, and plan A is still being earnestly worked on, and we'll try our very hardest to get that over the line. We're not going to pour good money after bad if we can't achieve that, though, and we'll go to another option that we're going to start exploring pretty soon.
So is there one party that has a veto over this somehow?
Well, any party, if we don't get the affected party approval sign-off of all participants, we have to go to a notified consent, which adds substantial additional cost and quite frankly would be detrimental to relationships across that community and that lake if we are having to fight and battle parts of the community to get something consented. That tells me that this is a project that will fail ultimately. So we're trying to get everybody to agree to the way forward, and in failing to do that, we would then stop and take a breath, have a cup of tea, to use the commonly used term, consider what our next options are and regroup around that. So it's not an end of our involvement in Whakakī. It could be a redirection or a reshape and a refocus.
There are 50 affected parties who all have to sign off, and at the moment, the overwhelming majority of them have not.
Have not.
Just through you, Chair. So what I'm hearing, and I've been meeting with a few around this, the Iwatia guys have got an issue with the height, and the Whakakī guys have got a not negotiable height. Correct?
That in a nutshell, I think, Nick, would be about the sum of it. It's the 2N concern about the Whakakī control, or it's the 2N concern about control and the level that's the sticking point. So they've said at the moment, no, not a conclusive absolute no, but at this point, no, we're not happy. Obviously, they're a key party that we would need to satisfy before we can move this forward. Now, that might take 5 weeks, it might take 5 months, it might take 5 years to get some resolution on that. We don't know.
Can we build it without the government money eventually?
We still need a resource consent, is the point.
So we've only got 5 weeks to get it done, but that's for the money.
That's for the Freshwater Improvement Fund.
Yeah, right.
So
I mean, we could negotiate for another 2 years and get there maybe.
Well, what I would prefer is that we are reasonably sort of honest and pragmatic about what's going to work here. And in managing our relationships with MFE, the funder, I would rather end up in a position where we say, actually, it's not working right now and we need to regroup around what we're going to do. So take that off the table, regroup around plan B, and then go back to them with another option that has broad support. Because this project's been delayed for close on 18 months now, and we've spent reasonable sum of money on it, and we haven't had any of that money leveraged out of the Crown back into the project. And the whole thing was built around having dollar for dollar commitment by the Crown into this. So the more we spend, the less that's real. So it's about being brutally pragmatic and saying, actually, we probably need to just stop, take here, regroup, and then think about another way of dealing with this if it's not going to work. If it can work and the team can pull a rabbit out of the hat in short order, fantastic. If not, we need to be ready with another option.
So the feedback I'm getting from the Iwatia end is they can't work at the height that's being prescribed.
So that's a discussion we need to have with them in more detail.
Yeah, I'm not speaking for them, but
Sure.
You're not.
and some of their future actions are not flash, so it's not good.
Yep. Yep.
No, it's not. And I think what we're seeing is a lack of give and take within the community. I mean, look, this is a whole compromise between a whole set of competing objectives. So it's not evident that people are sort of reaching deeply within themselves and finding something to give. They're holding their positions reasonably firm. And I think to your question, councillor, specifically about funding the weir, we would struggle to justify that expenditure without the Crown's co-investment. So we'd be putting that in the bottom drawer.
So we're very clear on that.
Yeah, and look, I just think the whole catchment's going to miss out enormously on an awful lot, but that doesn't seem to be a concern to a number of the parties up there.
And just to be clear, Councillor, of course, that the work that was started with the upper catchment farming community would carry on. So we're committed to that. That we've probably been a little bit distracted by the broader lake conversation and neglected that. So we want to pick that up and carry that forward. Like I say, it won't be an exit from the catchment and the lake. It's just a potential plan B. Fingers crossed, plan A works, but I don't work on hope and luck. I'm looking at what my next option and opportunity might be.
Need to sort it out. They're wearing my phone out. On both sides.
I would just comment that in a situation like this, I'm looking at the wording of page on item 15. I don't think we were fairly apprised of the riskiness of the situation.
Well, in fairness, this issue has only just arisen in the last literally 24 hours.
Okay.
So these papers were written
1 week.
2 weeks ago.
1 week.
Yeah. So this is a pretty volatile environment, to be honest. up there.
Okay.
And there was a meeting going on upstairs with the chair of the Whakaki Lake Trust at this very moment,
Yep.
trying to work through these issues. So
I'll be joining in a few minutes. Did you want to say anything about Tutera?
I just briefly, I'm mahi in Tutera. So our integrated catchment management plan is going well. We hope to complete that at the end of the start of next year. That'll be a community-owned document, so just going through the details of who's going to be driving the catchment's integrated plan into the future or past the project end date. We've had our first farm environmental management plans delivered to landowners, and we're working on the two biggest landowners within the catchment at the moment. And we're hoping to tap into some of the erosion-prone funding as part of those farm environmental management plans as well. And lastly is coming into summer, and we've had some challenges in the past around fish kills, so we're just keeping a close eye on our temperature in the lakes and just drafting a few media releases if in the case we have another bad year, which we fingers crossed we don't. In regards to the ahuriri, we've had a lot of landowners sign up from last year to carry on their planting and fencing. So that's made the works program a lot easier. We don't have to approach new people. We're just tapping into the persons that we've already engaged with. We've already had that win with the whika removal, around 30 tonne, with another removal to be undertaken next year, at the start of next year. And also working with landowners in the Wharerangi catchment to look at reducing the erosion on the stream banks as well.
Councillor Curtin.
Mr Chair, moving to the marine hotspot, unless someone else got a question on the prior.
So I've just, Councillor, just before you do, I've got a couple of points. Ollie and Anna can't be here today, but they've given me a couple of bullet points so I could just appraise you of, might answer some of your questions. Key points for them: the Wairara hard multi-beam survey is back, and it shows some really interesting features that they're going to go back and look at closer with our remote operated vehicle that we've got, a little cheap one that Anna operates. Currently scoping a multi-beam analysis of the Clive Hard and the Springs box, which are a bit further out. And there's work underway in the Prongaho catchment, fencing and planting to protect seagrass in the estuary, which is a really exciting find for the team. Seagrass is not common in New Zealand, let alone Hawke's Bay. And there's sediment work continuing in the bay. So that's their highlights. Apologies they can't make it today.
My question, Mr Chair, is in relation to paragraph 48, that's on page 61, and that sediment characteristics and behaviour reef mapping. I just want to ask, is there a connection with the Napier City Council and Hastings District Council in terms of their outfalls, monitoring sediment from their outfalls? Is there any? Does this project scope include monitoring and/or mapping sediment from their respective outfalls?
So the hotspot project wouldn't include monitoring of the outfalls. That'll be part of a consent
Sorry,
condition.
it's not monitoring, mapping.
Mapping. So I don't believe so, not at that granular scale, but I'd have to check and come back to you, sorry.
I wonder whether you could come back to us on that, and we talked this morning about collaboration with Napier City in particular around the science, and it occurs to me that that may be an opportunity to either leverage off, piggyback on. I see there the Napier City Council doing their own survey work in that zone, out in near the outfall. Hopefully they'll find it one day, and so I'm wondering whether we can somehow connect with their work.
Sure.
Any other questions? Someone like to move to receive the report? Councillor Wilson, seconder. Councillor Bevan. All those in favour? Aye. Carried. Thank you. And essentially freshwater. Is that
What else have we got there?
page 29?
Future farming.
Essentially freshwater.
This probably will blow over. Some of the talk pretty well.
So, Chair, look, I don't propose,
Are they wild?
Louise, who drafted the paper, is not present, but I don't propose to go into this in any great depth. Happy to take questions. I think the...
Some order, please.
Yes, please, can we have some decorum here?
The principal message I'd like to leave you with is that council staff are heavily engaged in this freshwater reform program. We have made Marianne Baker, the Senior Planner, available to the Ministry for the Environment's Essential Freshwater Task Force. So it's proposed will be working in Wellington potentially up to 4 days a week. Now that's a significant financial contribution from the Regional Council. We are effectively picking up her salary while the Ministry will pick up her travel and accommodation costs. That's recognised as her national level expertise in freshwater management, and it's a great opportunity for both us as a council and the regional sector to have some significant input into the next stage of freshwater reform. So Marianne's doing that. Ian, in his chair of the Resource Managers Group, is also heavily involved in that task force, and I represent the council on the Chief Executive's water subgroup. So we're very much engaged with central government on this. As you'll note from the paper, while there are some high-level intentions and an outline of the work program, a lot of the detail has yet to be clarified from central government, but this is just another significant surge in work in this space. And I just in closing would say that one of the things we've tried to impress upon the incoming government is that there has been a huge amount of work undertaken under the existing national policy statement. The likes of TANK as good examples, which you're all very familiar with. And what we're seeking to do is ensure that all of that existing work is understood, and we don't reinvent too many wheels in terms of freshwater reform, and we essentially build on the work that we've been doing. But there are some areas around things like allocation, resolving some of the issues around rights and interests for tangata whenua that government still wants to make some progress on, which essentially is the unfinished business from the previous government's work program in this area. So I'm happy to take any questions on it, but I guess the take-home is watch this space, because it may have impacts on our freshwater reform here in the region in the coming years as these further changes flow through.
Any questions? Councillor Wilson.
Just the iwi interests, how far are they getting with that? What's your take home from that?
Very early days. I'd make the observation that the sorts of proposals that they're looking at, particularly around underdeveloped Māori land and preferential allocation of unallocated water and potentially nutrient allocation for those properties, is something the previous government looked at in great depth and worked up with the iwi leaders group and got within a certainly within a cabinet meeting, of making progress on, but was just too hard. I see the same sort of approaches, the same sort of issues now being considered by the new government, and they don't have a dependence on the Māori Party that the previous government did, but they've also got New Zealand First, who have some rather strong views around preferential rights in relation to tangata whenua. So I don't expect this government's going to find any of these issues any easier than the previous government. They've got the best of intentions with resolving it, but I wouldn't be holding my breath that in short order we're going to see clear resolution of these issues.
Thank you. Happy to move, Chair.
Seconder? Councillor Dick? Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Verbal update on future farming.
Good afternoon, councillors. So the Future Farming Group did have its inaugural meeting last month. I'm just going to hand over to Karina Campbell, who's project leading the group's activities. You just may recall that the Future Farming Initiative is one of our PM Project Management Office pilot studies, and so that's why we get the benefit of a bit of extra resource and driving guidance from Karina. So I'll just hand over to Karina, and then we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Tom. Kia ora. So our working group was established and we had our first meeting on the 16th of October, and the meeting agenda and minutes and a list of the attendees have been circulated to yourselves. The terms of reference were discussed and agreed at that meeting, and there was a very strong commitment from each of the members that attended. We have 10 external members across a broad range of industries and farmers and growers, and we have a number of representatives from Hawke's Bay Regional Council, including 2 from the Integrated Catchment Management Area, and then we have Councillors Wilson and Belford, and Councillor Belford is chairing these sessions. Our next workshop, our next meeting is the 28th of November, and 2 key work streams came out of our inaugural meeting. The first was that it was crucial that we identify what best practice actually looks like in Hawke's Bay, because any future farming initiative, we need to know what it should look like. And so each of our members are tasked at the moment with gathering case studies and examples of what best practice looks like and why it's best practice. The second work stream that we will be commissioning after our next meeting will be to then inventory what existing initiatives, future farming aligned initiatives are taking place right now that we can partner with, collaborate with as well, to ensure that we're not duplicating effort, but also to ensure that we are maximising the opportunity to make something sustainable. So right now, for our next meeting, we're tasked with 2 key things: to consolidate the problem statement or opportunity, and to gather those case studies and best practice exemplars. And then we'll move on to commissioning and inventory.
Any questions, comments? Nothing to add to that?
What about you? I'd like to hear your adding to that as the chair.
I think the group, we have a pretty committed group of fellow travelers, I think, who are, while there is some spectrum there in terms of where people are when in the farming world, I think they all eyeballed each other and no fist fights occurred, and everybody seems enthusiastic about the work plan and committed to it. So even Fenton. So there we are.
Especially Fenton.
Especially Fenton. So we have a meeting in 2 weeks, and that was described to you. So I think we're making some good progress. We'll rubber meets the road a little bit in the next meeting, but
excellent.
So far so good. I'll move accepting the report. A seconder? Fenton?
I'll second.
Okay. And I've said my piece. Anyone else wish to speak? All those in favor?
Aye.
Carried. Thank you.
Hippies.
Don't you, hippies?
Last item, addressing New Zealand's biodiversity challenge, think piece. I think we're,
Campbell's here.
Oh, it must be going out somewhere. He's got a toilet.
So just a very brief information item for you all. And it's really to make you aware of a piece of work that's been done by the regional council, or the regional sectors, really, collectively, in looking at New Zealand's biodiversity challenges, but looking at it particularly from the perspective of regional councils and unitary authorities. And so, look, I wasn't planning to, as I don't usually, I'll plan just to have a brief chat about it, and then there's actually a 5-minute or 4 or 5 minute brief video for you. Rather than a presentation, which we'll run from the chair of the regional sector group, which discusses some of the key elements in it. But in essence, it's looking specifically at the regional council perspective and saying, across the system in New Zealand and biodiversity, given our particular niche in the system and role, what are some of the key things we believe are important to change in the system to enable it to basically get a better outcome across New Zealand for biodiversity. So I'll leave that there, take the item as read, and Annalie, if you'd like to run that video, please, that'd be fantastic.
Ocean Reaches. Hang on, went out to landing.
Can you press control there?
Control.
He's going to plant them all in pouches. Carry's going to carry
Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud, is home to precious tong, found nowhere else in the world. Our native flora and fauna does much to define us as a nation. However, our native plants and animals are in trouble. While good progress is being made in some areas, we are losing ground in many cases. Now is the time to address the challenges facing New Zealand's biodiversity before it's too late.
Regional councils have put together a paper called Biodiversity Think Piece. So that essentially looks at what are the issues that have led to biodiversity decline and what are those things we need to do collectively to ensure that we enhance what we've got and that we're successful going forward.
We believe there are 5 shifts that will make the greatest difference. Currently, there is leadership in different parts of the system from numerous public agencies, such as DOC and local councils, to private landowners, iwi and community groups. We need to shift to an environment where leadership is clear and roles and responsibilities are understood, where we are fostering collaboration and encouraging greater confidence to take action.
In projects like this, the Regional Council performs more of a facilitation or a catalyst role for getting works going, for being the in-between person between the landowner and other interested groups in environments like Papahikahawai Island.
Regional councils are seen as the experts in working with private landowners and iwi in achieving on-the-ground action to further biodiversity goals. The role of regional councils should be clearly defined as not only regulators, but also investors in, deliverers and enablers of biodiversity management.
We bought it 5 years ago, and at that stage the animals had access to the waterways and to quite a bit of the bush, so our main aim was to get it all fenced off and protected. So hand in hand with the council we've been able to do that, getting the fences in, getting the new trees planted.
One of the greatest issues with biodiversity decline is that it's a massive beast. The sheer size of the task makes it incredibly difficult to manage every species and ecosystem in every location as a priority. In the future, regional councils need to have the ability to agree on a single approach in order to prioritise need and to promote the use of that approach. More often than not, a key component to success is collaboration. This is about working together and alongside other agencies, landowners and communities on proactive projects to increase our likelihood of success and ultimately higher levels of funding.
We've planted some seedlings over a couple of years, and now we've had a great opportunity for a group of school kids coming to help free the plants from the grass that tends to smother the seedlings. Collaboration's the only way forward for us because we rely on free labour, as it were. So this is these school kids are coming down to help us today. When we do planting, we rely on the community to join us to plant the trees.
Te Ake Te Māori Operating Trust is a trust led by the Ngāti Tama Iwi. The main objective is to restore the conservation values and the Māori of the land, to rejuvenate the forest and bring it back to what it was many hundreds of years ago. Te Ake Te Māori Operating Trust work with Taranaki Regional Council quite closely. We have a memorandum of understanding, and they will help us in various ways, not just on the ground with hard mahi, but they also help us with a lot of technical support and that sort of thing as well.
The current legislative framework for biodiversity management in New Zealand is made up of a patchwork of statutes from different eras and philosophies. It is only by supporting regional councils to be given a function in biodiversity management that surpasses the Resource Management Act can we achieve true success.
Regulation's only a small part of what regional councils are about. We also have a lot of technical expertise, people out on the ground. They're able to advise community groups and landowners on the best way to go about things, and we can all work together and achieve great things for biodiversity.
New Zealand is recognised as a world leader in the management of pests and saving species. Many groups have poured time, effort and money into saving and protecting our Indigenous biodiversity. It is only by working together and supporting regional councils to adopt the 5 Shifts framework that we will be able to proactively protect our Indigenous species. But we need to move now.
Now is the time to create change. It is only by creating change that we will address New Zealand's biodiversity challenge. Our nation's native plants and animals are depending on it.
So Campbell, I really struggled through this paper, and I'll tell you why. Because through the work that you've done and others on the staff here,
Graham will
takeaway
introduce
was that-
himself in more detail, but he's a wealth of knowledge. He's been working for the department forever since.
my takeaway was that we're about 30 years ahead of this paper. Is there a single takeaway in this paper of significance to us? We've devoted resource, people, we have a trust, we have, we have targeting underway, I don't see anything in this that we're not way ahead of the curve on. Is that unfair?
So I think it's fair to say in some areas we are absolutely leading the curve. That wouldn't be arrogant to say that. If there is one single take home from this, that I got from it anyway, and that it is that to make a difference for biodiversity, in reality it's actually about active management. Now, biodiversity is complex, so there's policy and statutory and all sorts of a wide range of things which are critical to the overall end game. But actually, active management at a large scale within a region is what will drive the difference on the ground for biodiversity. Now, we're doing some initiatives, for example, like predator-free Hawke's Bay. We're working towards some of those large scale. We've clearly got a significant momentum and investment potentially not only taking place in planting, but proposed and further planting programs. And so the take home is, from at least my point of view, we're on the right track, but actually active management at scale is the critical part of the picture we still haven't got to yet. Yep.
I just might make the comment that I think this really, the think piece very much supports the direction of travel that the Hawke's Bay Regional Council's already been on, and I think it's more about signalling both to central government and to the wider community that regional councils have a very strong leadership value proposition and are already getting on and doing some of this, because there is a perception in the community and in some quarters of central government that the Department of Conservation is the agency that does biodiversity in New Zealand, and certainly within the funding landscape as well, there's often a perception that regional councils are not at the fore of all of this. So it is a bit positional in terms of advocating for a stronger mandate for regional councils and the leadership on this. And right now, as there is a discussion around a national policy statement on biodiversity and a biodiversity strategy being developed by the Minister of Conservation, we want to make very clear that our relationships with landowners and our positioning of biodiversity in a broader landscape of activity around freshwater management, climate change adaptation, biosecurity is all part of an integrated package, and that biodiversity is just not something standalone that you're going to put over the top of what we already do as our core business. So it is a bit about policy advocacy and promotion of our view of the world.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Campbell, one of the takeouts there is around collaboration. I was somewhat struck by the commentary from Napier City Council at a committee meeting last week around Napier City's approach to biodiversity. So my question is, how much discussion, collaboration, etc., is taking place with the local authorities? And I note the lack of contribution to the Biodiversity Foundation from our TLA counterparts, demonstrating that we're not quite on song with collaboration so far.
So I think there's, at least from my perspective, there's a couple of levels in that. The first is, I think there are a wide range of staff in this organisation at all levels who are collaborating or working with the TLAs in many cases on projects which have biodiversity outcomes. And I can think offhand of a few in my area immediately, but it's going on across our organisation. So I think that's one thing. I think we also have our Biodiversity Foundation and our guardians. They're actively working now, increasingly becoming independent of us as a council, and actually going to those TLAs and saying, hey, you have a role in this, and it's important you're part of it. So I think that's increasingly happened, and I think that'll only build over time. And I think in the end, actually, that will probably end up having additional funding coming directly into biodiversity. I'm also aware that through some of those sorts of initiatives, although it's not actually out in the press, if you like, or being talked about widely, Hastings District is actively looking at how they can support certain projects around this region in terms of funding for things which directly relate to biodiversity outcomes. And so we need to tell that story a little bit over time as well. So from my perspective, it is happening. I think, to be fair, they are still to some extent trying to figure out where and how they get involved in biodiversity and make a difference in it from their perspective. Yep.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Campbell. This Wellington initiative, which I think was in the DOM either today or yesterday, of network of urban predator traps with a view to introducing kiwi into backyards and whatever. How relevant is that to us in Heritonga Plains, which is essentially urban and peri-urban? Is there any relevance?
So I'm not sure I read the exact article you're referring to, but if it's referring to the predator-free Wellington context, so that is actually relevant to us. So ultimately, while we deal an awful lot with the private land context and regularly with the rural context, we still have a lot of programs which take place in urban or semi-urban areas across the organisation. So it is relevant to us, and in fact it's relevant because what they're doing right now is they're substantially proving up the template for us to apply across our urban areas in partnership with the likes of the TLAs over time. Yep.
So we'll keep an eye on that.
So we're actively linked into that project through the Predator-Free 2050 relationship, and in fact I think next year we've got a 2-day meeting including that team from Predator-Free Wellington, Predator-Free Dunedin, Taranaki and others to talk about what we commonly need to learn. Yep.
Very good, thanks.
Yeah, Campbell, thanks for that. I tend to agree with Tom that we are, a lot of people doing a lot of good stuff, and you and your team are nationally recognised and fairly so, I feel. We've all got a big challenge on this, and but we are leading the way. I mean, and it's wonderful Doug did that video, but recently I was in his ruhi travelling towards Opotiki, and for at least 150 k's, there were dairy farms with drains and not a tree in sight. You can't find that in Hawke's Bay very often at the moment. So, I think we are really getting ahead of the curve, and we should be celebrating ourselves. And leading to James's point, we need to let people in Wellington know, although I never really care what they think much, but we need to let them know that we are doing a lot of serious stuff here. And, I'm privileged to be on properties and around the place, and I was privileged to be in one in Ocean Beach just a couple of weeks ago, and it is stunning legacy stuff that a lot of our people are doing. And I don't mean behind the fence, I mean on this side of the fence. So I'd like to see us have a video about Hawke's Bay.
Yeah, I've got mixed views about this. I'm not convinced what I've just heard is correct. I'm involved in a predator control program up in the far north, and I'm talking about an area from Mangawhai Heads up to Whangarei, for those of you that know the geography of the far north. And there are literally dozens of community groups that are involved in predator control, and I don't see anything like that happening in Hawke's Bay. And why, you ask yourself? It's really simple, because the delivery is kiwi. That's what they're after. They want to extend kiwi habitat, and I don't see anything of the equivalent at all happening in Hawke's Bay. And I actually don't, sorry to say this, but I don't think your average Joe Blow gives a toss about biodiversity. What they care about is having tui in their backyard, or wood pigeons, or whatever. And so this is all about positioning, in my mind, and it's about what people can visibly see. It's not about biodiversity as a concept. It's about having native wildlife in their backyard. And if we position this right, we'll get the public on board.
Any other comments, Councillor Wilson?
I'm happy to move, Chair, and then I'll do a quick chat.
Okay. Is there a seconder?
Protocol.
I'll second, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Curtin, second it. Go for it.
I've just done a tour of the South Island with the TB Free guys, and it's this piece of work is quite timely, because regional councils are a dog's breakfast about their ability, or in some cases inability, to see biodiversity for what they can add to it. So, for example, when the TB Free programs pull out, councils such as Hawke's Bay and others shift in and maintain the gain. I can say that doesn't happen everywhere. In fact, I was quite staggered how many regions basically don't do anything toward biodiversity. So I think this is a timely bit of work, and if it starts a conversation that gets, as you say, a bit of leadership going around this stuff, and people get behind it, I think it will go a long way. I mean, Predator Free New Zealand, the Trust, is lamenting the fact that it's such a diverse range of appetite throughout the country to deal with this stuff. And, backing up what Councillor Bevan said, I mean, everyone's got different priorities, it would seem. So I think it positions itself well. It's quite, we are probably ahead of some of this stuff, but that doesn't mean we can't endorse it and get behind it. So.
Councillor Curtin.
Probably Councillor Bevan's court. I found the little video clip somewhat sleep-inducing.
Well, Councillor Bevan on the video clip.
I don't mean that in a mean way. What I'm saying is that to capture hearts and minds, we've got to do something a little bit more significant than that, and comes down to the comms approach. So, and whether we like it or not, if you like, the Sentinel. Something I mentioned previously is a number of our areas actually identifying a species that we want to preserve in that particular location and sort of make it about the critters there, as opposed to, you know, councils collaborating, if you know what I mean. It's meaningless to the broad populace. So it's being clever about, you mentioned that, Mr. Chair, being clever about how we engage both with our councils and with the public to get momentum. I think that's probably a better place for us to be, as opposed to trying to work nationally to, you know, make pixie dust.
In a previous incarnation, I've raised literally hundreds of millions of dollars for endangered species, and it's all about charismatic critters. It's all about, you know, it's all about targeting the and it's an animal. It's not a bug. It's not a plant. It's an animal, and that's where the money comes from, and that's where the public response comes from. And so, I mean, I think we've done a terrific job of getting all the institutional pieces in place, but that isn't what, having a trust isn't what excites people. It's saying we're going to restore X in this place. That does get people excited. And we've got a lot of these presentations. That's partly why I put it at the bottom of the list, frankly, because we've got a lot of presentations around getting the pieces put together, and yet to get the presentation that says, here are the 5 top projects right in front of us that we are, you know, that we're committed to, and we're going to make a difference on in the next 5 years or whatever it is. Keep waiting for this, the fruits of this targeting process, to put something in front of us that we're actually.
Waiting for the 100 million you're going to raise for us.
I haven't quite seen the charismatic speech. We're talking Siberian tigers and white rhino.
What's wrong with the wetter? I'm up the wettest, man.
Anyway, any other comments? I think we had a mover and a seconder. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're finished at only 2:15.
Oh, done time.
Workshop time. Workshop time. You want to take a 5-minute break, or somebody else is chairing the workshop, not me.
Oh no, you can do that.